and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have Alejandro Rojas coming up in just a minute with the UFO updates. Our guest this evening, a repeat guest, Christopher O'Brien. He was on last January, so about 10 months or so ago. And we're going to be talking about all different aspects of the UFO field and a lot more. Well, all regarding UFOs, I would imagine, or similar topics. So I want to thank everyone that supports the show and very much. And it's going to be Thanksgiving here in America tomorrow, so I want to give an extra thanks to all you people that have helped out and help keep us on the air. And you can support the show for $2 or more per month, and that information is on podcastufo.com. And if you can't support the show and you still want to listen to it live, you can always go to podcastufo.com every Wednesday evening at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can also listen to the whole show as a podcast on the Dark Matter Digital Network, and that's on Thursdays from 10 to midnight, and that's Eastern Standard Time as well. And so that's it for me. Alejandro, are you doing anything exciting for Thanksgiving? I know it's just in America. We have a lot of other listeners, but it's one of my favorite holidays. It's very festive. I enjoy it.
Good.
No, I asked you a question.
Oh. Well, you asked me, and then you said, and then you were asking me if I'm doing something special.
Yeah.
You know what? The typical dinner with family type of stuff. So that's kind of fun, and having some family in town I haven't had in town in a while. And since I got my new house, so I'm excited to show them the house. So,
yeah, I bet. Yeah.
So, yeah, it should be fun. I mean, I like hanging out with family and stuff and loved ones. So I am definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, awesome. So before we get into the news, I did want to talk. You and I both watched Arrival, and I don't want to do any spoilers out there to listeners who haven't who haven't watched it yet. But I really, really enjoyed that movie. I thought it was great. And what did you think of it?
I liked it too. You know, it was what I thought it would be, more like Contact, so it's not a shoot 'em up kind of alien thing. But it makes you think. I mean, it really makes you think, and especially for people in this field to think about this topic often. It's fun to have movies like this that kind of change your perspective a bit and give you something new to think about. And that movie did that. That's for sure.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of meat to it, and it was more, I was expecting, maybe a lot more special effects, and I was glad that they weren't. It was really based more on the meat of the topic than it was on special effects, although there were some really good ones. But it wasn't crazy with special effects like some of the movies are. So.
Yeah, what's cool about the special effects on this movie too is that they're really good. So it doesn't feel like special effects. I mean, it's not this action stuff. It's just places and craft, of course, and creatures. But they're done so well that it doesn't feel like special effects. So. Very well done.
And I think they handled it pretty well with the predictability of the human nature, and that is, again, I'm trying not to spoil anything, but violence always seems to be part of our nature, and I better stop talking or I am going to spoil things. But it's kind of like I thought they portrayed that very accurately. How it
and I think to me, I don't think this will spoil. And you can cut it if you think I am. I don't think so. But one of the questions I walk away from and really made me think about is, are we ready? And, people can see the events in the movie and see what they think of that. But it really, I keep coming back to that question, thinking about the different, scenarios and things maybe you wouldn't think of that were brought up in this movie.
Yeah, and good actors, not big name actors, but really good actors in that. And again, the movie's called Arrival, and if you're into this topic, I really suggest to check it out. It's a great movie. I give it a thumbs up, 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, definitely a must watch for people who are into this topic. And in the spirit of the movie, I give it 8 thumbs up.
Very good. They'll understand after they watch it.
Yeah.
All right. So anything going on in the UFO world?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll talk to you next week then.
All right. Have a good Thanksgiving. Happy Turkey Day.
All right.
No, there are a couple of things happening.
Oh, okay.
I wrote a story yesterday that I'm proud of that I hope you let me share.
Yes, do, please.
But I think it's interesting. So I wanted to wait until this whole Podesta email thing was finished, wait till the elections was over to kind of recap. And this story's actually been brewing. I've been saving information, conversing with people. And then I wanted to finally take a look back to see what story that came out of the Wikileaks. And I think that I've got it, and I highlighted it here. And really what I've seen here, and there is a guy who emails me, and I thank him at the end of the story, named Elephant in the Room, and he had kind of similar ideas, and he was really helpful in giving me a couple of pieces of information I was not aware of. But in these emails, Tom DeLonge, of course, we talked about this meeting he had with these 2 generals. One of them who worked at Wright-Patterson was in charge of research labs. One of them who worked with the commander of Space Command. And then this private guy worked in the private sector who worked with Lockheed Skunk Works, who, of course, is in charge of Area 51. So, and Podesta, John Podesta, Hillary's campaign manager, arranged all this. So the top of the top, these are the people who you would want to talk to. Well, interesting enough, what's interesting about this is that actually Tom DeLonge seemed to be a little disappointed in the meeting. He wrote an email that we can see after the meeting saying that McCaslin, who is the Wright-Patterson general, DeLonge says to Podesta, he mentioned he's a skeptic. He's not. I've been working with him for 4 months. I just got done giving him a 4-hour presentation of the entire project a few weeks ago. He goes on to say that McCaslin actually helped him assemble his advisory team. He also made note that, of course, McCaslin was in charge of the labs at Wright-Patterson, which is where he says, that the Roswell craft was taken. So DeLonge obviously believes in the Roswell crash and everything. Now, I spoke with Grant Cameron, and we debated a bit. But, like Grant points out, these guys knew who they were going into a meeting with. They knew they were going in with Tom DeLonge, who believes that aliens or technology has been back engineered from crashed UFOs. He believes in Roswell, stuff like this. He shared that. In fact, that's what his project is about UFOs and back engineering. So why would they talk to him? What's even more interesting, of course, is that Tom DeLonge says this guy advised him and helped him come up with his group of people. Well, looking back in other comments Tom DeLonge has made, including on Facebook, he says, for instance, he talks about landing at a tarmac, walking off the plane, meeting a guy in his 60s who's a multi-star general. They began to talk, and this general told him that we found a life form. Tom says, he said, I need help getting this story out to young adults. And the general said, what do you need? And Tom DeLonge said, advisors. And then he says that this person helped him come up with a team of advisors. Wow. So essentially he's saying here, he's implying that this McCaslin helped him come up with advisors, and told him that they had found a body. So, I mean, I think that's really significant. And the question here is, of course, is Tom lying? Did McCaslin not really say this? Another theory, which Robbie Graham, who wrote the book Silver Screened Saucers, some people may be familiar with him. He's in the UK, and he has a different aspect. He's been writing on Mysterious Universe, a blog about how Tom DeLonge could be a victim of disinformation from the military. And there have been situations where the military has approached the media, said, hey, we're going to give you information, proof that we've interacted with aliens that you can release to the public. And then later on, at later stages, they say, nope, sorry, we can't do that.
Linda Moulton Howe for one.
Yeah, Linda Moulton Howe. The person who approached her was Richard Doty. And, of course, I've written quite a bit about that, and I embedded my videos where I do a whole analysis on that whole situation. But Robbie has been writing about more. So those are kind of two perspectives. There's Grant, who's saying, oh, no, this is happening. The general probably does want to release this information. He's working with Tom DeLonge to do it. There's Robbie saying, no, he's a victim of disinformation. He's just falling prey, similar to what these other people have done. The thing is, in both of these scenarios, that we would find out soon. So in other words, if Grant is right, like Grant says, even come January, he says, we're going to know, because the next step will be taken, and they'll release some information, and some sort of, step towards UFO disclosure will be happening. In the Robbie scenario, then the military at some point, maybe even using these WikiLeaks, because they probably weren't expecting these WikiLeaks, but maybe even using them as an excuse, saying, oh, we can't work with you anymore, Tom DeLonge. We've told you all this important stuff, but now we can't give you that proof or anything to move forward, which is what they did in the past. They said, so sorry, and walked away. Another scenario is that they just have an interest in UFOs, like John Podesta, and they do want to help him out. But even if that's the case, they're helping someone out who's essentially saying, like especially with this McCaslin general, that he's part of this major cover-up, covering up this alien technology they got from the Roswell crash that they're holding at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So it's just really weird. It's an odd mystery. I think it's really interesting. And we're probably not done, because DeLonge has said he's still working on all of this. We know Podesta is still into UFOs. We don't know what he thinks of all of this. But I think it's just a really incredible, really interesting mystery that's posed here. And even if Robbie's right and it's disinformation, the military's kind of got busted. In the past, we don't really have names or anything. But in this case, we do know McCaslin was at least attending this meeting and everything. And, Tom DeLonge didn't mean to call him out or name him, but now he is named. So,
well, Doty's been named in the past, as far as
Doty was named. Doty named himself, yeah. So, but Doty also says he had his own handlers, who he has not divulged who they are.
Yeah.
So, and people question whether or not he did have handlers or not. So, yeah, it's really weird. I think it's a really great mystery. So I've outlined all of this for people on this story I wrote recently.
Wow, great. And are you going to reach out to Tom yourself? Because I know he was on Open Minds at one time, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've interviewed him. He used to have a website called Strange Times, where he would repost our work with our permission, with links back to us. So we did have somewhat of a relationship. He actually came to the UFO Congress.
Right.
Because when Bob Lazar was there, he actually, of course, has spoken with George Knapp on Coast to Coast. And but we haven't spoken in a while, and really haven't heard from him. And I guess I've been working through a friend of a friend So he is aware of what I'm writing and keeping up on, and this friend of a friend, it says I'm doing well in not stumbling, like not making assumptions or not stepping out of line or connecting the dots in a silly way or anything. So, but so far he hasn't reached out or anything. I'm not sure that he will.
Yeah.
Of course, he's big time and he's working with these big guys, but it would be wonderful if he did, because I really, if you look at it, people criticize Tom DeLonge and what he's doing, but what would you do, is a question, if you had this, if you had the ability to meet with these generals to discuss these topics?
Mm-hmm.
You may be cognizant or wary that it's possibly a disinformation situation, but I would still meet with them. I would still talk with them and create these relationships. So I don't.
Yeah.
I think it's wise that he's doing that. Hopefully, he's not being dishonest in any way, like some people are implying. But
I don't think it would be any to his benefit at all to be dishonest.
Yeah, he doesn't need to. They were saying maybe for marketing purposes, trying to get people more excited about what he's doing. But I really, again, I think that it's great he's pursuing this, and he's getting to places that other researchers have not been able to get.
Right.
And for better or worse, now due to mostly WikiLeaks, we're getting some insight into the great progress he has made. So, yeah, I don't really blame him for doing what he's doing. I think it's really interesting, and I would love to talk to him.
Yeah, I hope you get to. Well, we're plumb out of time, so if we had any other UFO news, we're going to just have to table it for next week. Yeah.
Okay.
All righty. All right. Hey, thanks, man. And we'll
no problem.
We'll see you next week, and have a great Thanksgiving tomorrow.
You too. Have a great Turkey Day.
I will. All right. All right, hang in, everyone. We'll be right back after this quick music break with Chris O'Brien. Wow. That music, I forget to mention this sometimes, but Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse from Ireland writes music for movies, and a lot of movies, and some that are, big movies, not just independents. Anyway, he supplies music for this show, and that was written for the Allagash incident. And he has a bunch of different ones. So, of course, we play these little parts of these clips almost every show. And welcome to the show, Chris.
There, happy day before Turkey Day.
That's right, right. I think this is your third visit on this show, and you're always welcome, always a lot of fun. And so we have a lot of new listeners all the time. Just I know that you're part of the Paracast, so you know what that's about. So if you can go a little bit into your background, but one thing I don't think I've ever asked you is what got you interested in the UFO topic and other topics that you're interested in the very beginning?
Well, that's I guess a good question. And for many years, I would not really fess up to the real reason, because starting out as an open-minded skeptic, but a healthily skeptical field investigator, I didn't publicly come out with this particular motivation for many years, because I didn't want it to color people's impression of me and then consequently my work. But I'm an experiencer. I had a very up close and personal encounter when I was 7 years old in Bellevue, Washington. Wow. It's similar in some ways to a lot of encounters that, of course, people have heard about since the 70s, basically, late 70s, early 80s, around the Whitley Strieber time period, where there seems to have been quite an upsurge in contactee reports, encounter reports, abductions, that sort of thing. But when I was 7 years old, I woke up one night in the spring of I'm not sure if I was 7 or just about to turn 7, but it was in the spring of 1963. I'm 59, and I had these non-human entities about the same height as me, ringing around the foot of my bed, and it was pitch black in my room. My room was kind of half in the basement, half underground in the basement. If I stood on my bed as a little kid, I could put my chin right at ground level, and I had two windows that were at ground level, about 6 feet off the ground, 5 feet off the ground. And so my bedroom was unusually dark because it was outside my window was a cantilever. The house didn't go all the way down to the ground. The upper floor above me stuck out into the yard about 4 or 5 feet. So it was unusually dark in there at night. And the only reason that I was able to detect that there was something there is because the three entities at the foot of the bed, there seemed to be a fourth one in the back that was kind of hiding. That may have been a little bit taller, but they were about the same height as me, about 3.5, 4, about 4 feet tall. And they were holding these about 2 foot lit. I called them stickmen with spears. It was the only description that I could give my family. But there were three beings, impossibly skinny. I mean, with arms like maybe about as thick as my thumb. I mean, really super skinny. That's why I called them stickmen. And they had these kind of hands. I couldn't really get much detail from the hands, but they were holding these lit wands that had this light that was kind of jumping up and down and sparkling. And there was enough light so it illuminated them. And not much, but enough so that I could see that they were not your normal, humanoid, a person. Mm-hmm. And of course, first thing I did was hide under the covers and hoping that I was dreaming. And when I pulled the covers back down, they were still there. I was not paralyzed. I had full mobility. And of course, the first thing I did was dash out of the room. I just ran to the left, sideways out the door, turned the corner, went up 10 stairs to the landing outside right inside the front door. And they had either teleported to the top of the stairway that went up to my parents' side of the house, or there was another group there. I don't know. But when I turned the corner at the top of the staircase in the landing inside the front door, they were standing at the top of the next set of stairs.
Jeez. Sounds like a nightmare.
I had no choice but to run through the kitchen. And I was going to go through the kitchen door and run around the house through the backyard because my parents had their own outside entrance. And I pulled the door open and I wanted to run through the door, and I forgot my dad had put the screen door on, and I ran right into the screen door. Boom, and it literally knocked me down. And I turned and looked, and they were standing at the other end of the kitchen looking at me. And I got a little bit better look at him at that point. And I'm not sure why, but I ended up running down the driveway and then through the hedge to the neighbor's house, because I thought if I could bang on their door, they'd let me in, and I could call my parents and say, look, something weird is going on here. I banged on the Richards' door, my neighbors, and nobody answered. And I looked back, and the Richards had a 3-step terraced yard. So there was like a platform, and then some gardens, and then about 4 feet down another platform of grass, and then went down to another area to some hedges. And I could see the tops of their heads just barely, and they weren't bobbing. They were moving in a very smooth motion. And they kind of stopped together and moved together. It was almost like they were one thing, but they were, definitely separate. So my only recourse, because nobody answered the door, was to run out in the middle of keep going towards the next neighbor's house. And they had a big lawn with like a street light that was right by their garage. And the street light lit their driveway outside of the garage. And I ran out in the middle of the lawn, and I stood there for a second, because it was obvious they were following me. So I wanted to see them. I had plenty of room around me, and I wanted to really get a better look at them when they came through the light from the street light or farm light that the Richards had. And I've told the story a number of times on the air over the years now. But the weirdest thing about the whole incident, if what I've described already isn't weird enough, is they approached the light, and then they turned. The only way I can describe this is they turned sideways, and it was like they had no depth. They came through the light as thin lines. It's like when you take a piece of paper and you turn it sideways. And that absolutely terrified me. The next thing I remember was pounding on the next neighbor's door. I don't recall seeing them following me, but the last thing I remember is the porch light coming on. The Barkers, who are the other neighbors, their porch light came on, and the next thing I know, I'm 3 houses away, across the street. I'm several hundred yards away. I'm at the end of a porch. I don't know how I got there. My sister is coming on the porch in her nightgown, in her robe, and she took me home. And of course, I refused to go down in my bedroom. And my sister was 18.
Now, why was she there at that other house?
Well, it turns out that the Barkers had called my house, and she was the one that picked up the phone.
I see.
And she said, the Kimmy, as I was called when I was a kid, is out here hysterical. We don't know what's going on. And so she went over there. I wasn't there. And then she started looking for me. And she said that she looked for me for about 15 or 20 minutes. It may have been longer. She wasn't quite sure, but that was kind of but it wasn't. Actually, I quizzed her on this in the late 90s about this, and I said, "You remember that time?" And she said, "Yeah, I do." And so we kind of compared notes, and she thought it was very strange. So she let me climb into bed with her, and because I was pretty terrified, really, and kind of just to give you a sense of how deeply traumatized I was. She said that I tried to nurse her. She'd never told me this until I brought this back up in the 90s, and she said, "Yeah, you tried to nurse me when you were in bed."
Yeah.
And of course, my parents said you had a dream, you had a nightmare, you were sleepwalking. Of course, I've never sleptwalked ever before or since. I've never had a full on experience like this since.
Oh, you haven't? I was going to ask that.
No, I did have another instance that happened, but I think it was a group. It's in my first book. the Mysterious Valley. I had something come through the wall in my bedroom in Colorado, and it was almost like a rippling in the air. I really couldn't see. It was almost like they were cloaked. Similar kind of situation. They came through very close to me on my right side through the wall. The headboard of the bed that my girlfriend and I slept in was against the outside wall, and they came in. I felt a large presence. There was a number of them, and they seemed to gather around the foot of the bed. I woke her up and quietly and said, "Look at the foot of the bed. Do you see anything?" And she said, "No." And I always thought that was, I wanted validation. I wanted, somebody to. And she was very sensitive. And come to find out 2 weeks later, I found out actually a number of days later that my neighbor, who was about maybe 200 feet away, the next house over in the little town I lived in, that something had happened to her and her child, but she didn't want to talk about it. And so it took about 2 weeks for me to kind of soften her up, and she went ahead and agreed to talk to me. Of course, she didn't want me to use her name, but I can say that she was the widow of a very, very famous psychologist from England, who I've named elsewhere, so I might as well, Artie Lang's widow. And she said that a group of humanoid gray-type aliens had come through the wall of her son's bedroom. She happened to be sleeping on the love seat that was in his bedroom because he was really upset that night. And she saw them come through. She said that they were like rippling water when they came through the wall, and then they became fully present. She could see them. They were opaque. And she said they ignored her, but they were concentrating on her boy. And she surrounded herself and her son with light and closed her eyes and prayed and said, "If you're not, of the light, leave." And they stuck around for a little bit, but left. And I was really intrigued by this. And I said, "Did you happen to take notes of when this happened?" She goes, "Yeah, I keep a journal." It happened 20 minutes after I had my experience, just 200, 300 feet away. So it was the same night within less than a half an hour time period. So I'm pretty convinced that I picked up on something that night. And if people are interested in that particular event, I do go into it in detail in the Mysterious Valley, and then my own personal experience as a child. I mentioned in my third book, but for many years I refused. I just knew I couldn't tell anybody about this except my family. My brother, he was a year younger than me. He believed me. And we shared another experience later on. There were no entities involved, but we saw craft coming over Lake Washington late at night. We had a couple of interesting experiences. I was woken up by my bedside table drawer moving in and out on its own, and the rattling of the wooden drawer is what woke me up. There was a strange green glow. Went downstairs. Craft was out coming from west to east over Lake Washington. We had a beautiful view of Seattle from across the lake in Bellevue. And so in answer to your question, I know that's kind of a long answer, but that changed my life. I had not been exposed to science fiction. I wasn't allowed to watch TV except at Disney and Lawrence Welk and a few select programs that my parents would allow my brother and I to watch. I wasn't exposed to mass media. They were very down on. They were very protective of us. I had no concept of what aliens were. Maybe peripherally, I kind of did, but no images or anything like that. And if I did have images, they weren't anything like what I experienced. This was way outside of my realm of experience and comprehension as a 7-year-old, and. But I'll tell you, I learned to read at 4. I was a very bright kid, and I immediately just devoured every book I could find on the subject.
How'd you know what it was, though? I mean, when you're 7 years old, like you said, it took a long. When did you start reading books on this? I should ask.
As soon as I got a library card.
But I mean, how did you know what it was? I mean, you're a 7-year-old. These things show up at your bed. Did you have any thoughts? I mean, did you think they just have to be from another planet or something? Or
no, I never thought that. It was only going through looking for information. I thought maybe that they were, I was exposed then to elves and fairies, and then, the whole idea of UFOs and aliens were kind of cemented into my head because of the experience of seeing the glowing kind of green oval coming across the lake. And I'm not even sure. This was about 6 months later. I wasn't even sure. I didn't know if the two events were related. I remember yelling at them, "What do you want? Why are you following me? Say something." And they were completely neutral. They seemed almost like they were in a trance. I've blocked out what their eyes look like. I don't remember big almond-shaped eyes. I do remember they had a pasty, whitish, kind of matte, non-reflective skin tone. They had spindly, like I said, impossibly skinny, spindly limbs. The one in the back seemed to have possibly clothes or a cloak or something on. I couldn't really tell. There were no clothing, no identifying genitalia. I don't remember ears or even mouths. I can't really even recall if they had mouths. And they seemed they move like cattails in the wind. They move perfectly in sync together, which really was quite startling. So, I started devouring every book that I could read, and started accumulating books, some of which I still have. Some of the original Adamski books and a Donald Menzel book, who was an early debunker. As a kid, I really wanted to try to explain away this whole experience, somehow come up with some sort of information that would, kind of put my mind at ease. And it wasn't until the early 90s I was reading a John Keel book, I think Operation Trojan Horse. He mentions 3 cases of children having experiences in Redmond, I think, and in Issaquah, which are 2 towns. One's on the west side of Bellevue and the other's on the east side of Bellevue. And it was during that same spring of '63 that there were 2 other cases, I think 2 or 3. And one of the kids said stickmen, used the same exact term that I did. I'm not sure which Keel book it is, and I'm pretty sure it's a Keel book. And that was kind of some major validation for me many years later, obviously, 30 years later. Something like that happening to you changes, you absolutely have a completely 180-degree view about reality. I knew that these things were extremely strange. I couldn't find it took me a long time to really find any information. I, devoured every UFO book I could find. I remember reading Incident at Exeter when it came out, Interrupted Journey when it came out, and I kept this whole thing secret. I didn't profess any sort of interest in the subject for years and years and years until I was in high school. I started to, let my interest and my curiosity be known to friends and stuff. Of course, I did dabble in quite a number of psychedelics when I was in high school and college. So that allowed me, I think, the freedom to talk to close friends about it. And, I lived in New York City for many years, and you just don't talk about aliens and UFOs when you live in Manhattan. It's social suicide. And I knew better. And it wasn't until I had moved out to Colorado in 1989 that stuff. I did have a sighting experience in '79 up in New Paltz with a number of friends, half of which were tripping and the other half weren't, by the way. We went to a Gentle Giant concert, and I've happened to spot some stars that seemed to be moving, and brought everybody's attention to it. And we lay on the football field, and sure enough, they were milling around. And those of us, under the influence, were the one. Saw them first, and the other people, it took them a little while to see them, but then it was obvious because they started zipping around fairly obviously, and we got bored and went to a party after they settled down. It's kind of strange, but it wasn't until I got out to Colorado and had events happening literally overhead of the town and starting to investigate them. I wrote an article for the local paper, which got picked up by the news services and went all over the world. And I got inundated with people interested in the article. And God, 2 or 3 months later, Unsolved Mysteries showed up and sightings and all these TV shows and stuff because of the kinds of activity that were going on in Colorado at the time. And I do document all this in my books about the San Luis Valley, where I lived in Colorado. Probably some of your listeners are aware of my work there, but I did meticulously put together a database of my investigations, which I'm going to be publishing. I had so many people asking me for information about the sighting events that I was investigating, investigators from all over the world, that I started publishing a monthly report to send out free. I didn't charge for it. To send out to other investigators to keep them up to speed on what was going on. And I think I did 6 years of these things. When activity would die out for months at a time, there would be 2, 3, 4 months I wouldn't put out one, but then boom, as soon as I had enough stuff to put together in my Mysterious Valley report, as I called it, I'd send it out. It's a stack. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit them all in a single book, but there's I had 10 data points for my database, and I had around 1,000 separate events that I investigated or was made aware of and made phone calls and did my best to cover 10,000 square miles. The San Luis Valley is the world's largest alpine valley, and I put up 300,000 miles on my truck in 6 years, running around investigating cattle mutilation cases and UFO reports and crypto, Bigfoot, other types of things, occult crime, kind of strange sort of brujo, Native American weirdness, a whole kind of potpourri of things that came my way through the local law enforcement, the local university. I was working with the head of the Department of Sociology and a couple of astronomy students there, and I was the unofficial deputy of weirdness for like 4 or 5 counties in Colorado. They had my number there by the dispatcher, and if somebody would call up with a report, they tell them to get in touch with me. And because I was local and I honored people's requests for anonymity, and I didn't embellish things and I didn't sensationalize things, people trusted me. And I was able to make quite a bit of headway and pull cases out. Neighbors would call and say, you got to talk to so-and-so, something landed in their field, or a family member would call and say, these people don't want to talk about it, my uncle or whomever. And, I'd work on them slowly and get them to open up so that I could get the data. But I'm really proud of my database. It's probably the largest database from a single geographic region. Maybe Ann Druffels is bigger from the LA basin area because she had an extra 25, 30-year head start on me. But, man, I'll tell you, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reports in there. And those are the only the reports that had 10 data points. If I didn't have a date, a time, a duration, I couldn't use it in my database. So I literally had thousands of stories, reports, that sort of thing. But the ones that made the database had to have the 10 data points.
Wow. We have a number of questions on the forum. And by the way, anyone can join the forum. It's a real easy sign in. I just have to approve you because of the spammers. But anyway, before that, though, I just wanted to ask you, when you're telling your story at 7 years old, a few people in the chat room said, wow, that's almost like way too detailed for a 7-year-old. I just wanted you to address that. But also,
yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel? How does it make you feel to tell that story? I mean, does it get you?
Now I'm okay with it because I have gone public with it. In terms of detail, I have a semi-photographic memory. I was extremely bright as a child, gifted child in gifted programs. I have a very good recall, especially the younger I was, the better my recall was. And this kind of experience was emblazoned into my mind. I remember details that this is the most vivid memory I have from my childhood, besides getting my front two teeth knocked out by a line drive playing baseball. That was kind of a hard one to forget. A couple of bad falls on my bike. I remember in great detail. Human memory is interesting, and that is a good point. Normally people don't have real good recall when it comes to most mundane things that happen in our lives, and 99.999% of our lives are mundane. But I recall dreams from my childhood, very vivid dreams, some reoccurring that have nothing to do with UFOs particularly, but being a little kid and sneaking under the table during the Christmas party. This would have been when I was 8 or 9, and sneaking half filled glasses of wine and trying them under the table with my brother. Going to Disneyland, remember that really well. I remember where I was when Kennedy was assassinated. I remember it in great detail. I happened to be in L.A. with my mom and my little brother, and I remember the cops pulling a dead body out of the trunk of a car as we came out into the parking lot. So vivid experiences tend to become emblazoned in your in your mind and in your memory banks, and they do have staying power.
Okay. Another person asked, have you ever considered or have you ever had regression therapy? Hypnotherapy?
No. I did one time when I was 13. My mom took me because I got so bored in school. I already knew all the answers, and all the kids. I just was way ahead of everybody, and I started acting up in school. And so my mom took me to the first certified hypnotherapist in the United States, Dr. Ivor Berkland. Look him up. And his son was Buzzy Berkland, who was the chief orthopedic doctor for the U.S. ski team. And Ivar Berkland's grandson, Bob Berkland, was on my soccer team, the 3-Point Hornets. We were Washington State champions in youth soccer. I was in the first youth soccer league in the United States. Buzzy, his dad, was a psychologist and was the first licensed hypnotherapist. And my mom took me for some motivational hypnotherapy, and I think I may have been regressed because she never let me go back, and she was freaked out when she talked to Berkland about my session, and she wouldn't let me hear what they were talking about. And I never went back. And I do remember him asking me some things about my my earlier childhood, because I was adopted. My brother and I were both adopted by the O'Briens. And for some reason, because I was in a hypno state, I don't remember the exact questions, but I do have a sense that he was asking me about earlier times. And, I was about 13 at that point. And my mom, uncharacteristically, she wouldn't talk about it. And I asked her and badgered her, and she wouldn't talk about it. I remember when I was 10, going to Safeway, shopping on a Saturday with my mom, and seeing a National Enquirer or the World News or one of those, supermarket rags with the headline, "Flying Saucers Killed My Horse." And that was the Snippy the Horse case. I remember that as a kid, bugging my mom to give me 25 cents or whatever it was to buy it. And of course, I devoured the article before I even got home. And it's interesting that I should end up in Colorado in the San Luis Valley, about 40 miles from where that case took place. And I got to know the owner of the horse, and I have the only full-length video interview with him. And I'm probably one of the the most knowledgeable people about that case now because of the amount of work that I put in on it. It's a whole chapter in my book, Stalking the Herd, which we talked about last time I was here. So, what can I say? That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay, good. We have some.
Oh, he is the guy that disses Linda Moulton Howe. I recall his past appearance on your show. He knows everything. Just ask him. Well, Phil.
Oh, I see you're in the chat room.
Yeah, I don't diss Linda Moulton Howe. I just don't agree with her conclusions. I'm very grateful to Linda. She trained me how to interview people out in the field. She is a tremendously courageous investigator. I think she's kind of gone off the rails a bit in her work. She's got blinders on. She's figured it all out, and she only looks at the data that supports her conclusions. But I don't diss her. I just don't agree with her.
Yeah, well, I think
and yes, I did spend time. Guest 625. Yes, I did spend time talking UFOs and crop circles and the paranormal and politics with Lawrence Rockefeller. He funded me for 2 years.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
I didn't even. Okay, so you're reading off the chat room. I was going to read you some. I was going to read you some questions on the forum that I think these were sent in.
Yeah, I'm in the chat room. Where's the forum?
The forum. It's a drop down on the website as well. But I'll read. I'll read you this question here. Do you think cattle mutilations are caused by humans? Are there any cases you are familiar with to appear to involve a level of surgical technique or surgical technology that would suggest something more advanced than a human source?
Yes, there are. There are cases that I believe are high strange. They even paranormal. A great example of that would be a case in Iowa in 1980. The head of the Iowa Veterinary College, or Iowa State Veterinary College, I think his name was John Andrews, attempted to duplicate a fresh calf mutilation. He and his veterinary pathologist buddies attempted to duplicate a case side by side in the pathology lab, and they, with great difficulty, were able to duplicate all the surgeries. But his comment was in the pathology report, whoever did this had to have been a world-class veterinary pathologist or surgeon, because they almost were not able to pull the tongue, to cut the tongue out deep in the esophagus the way it was done on the case. They attempted to duplicate it on a calf, and with great difficulty they were able to do it. But there were only a handful of people really that are capable of have that kind of skill set. So and there are other cases. We had a case, this calf was missing its brain with no break into the skull. The brain case was completely dry. The animal was found in 5 inches of snow. The respiratory organs, the lungs were gone. The spine was gone from the back of the skull to where the spine joins the hips. The right front leg was gone. The liver and heart were surgically perfectly excised and left in the bottom of the body cavity. Those are the 2 organs that animals go after first, by the way, scavengers. And it was found in a pristine 5 inches of fresh snow, and there was 1 drop of blood that we found, and it was on the back left hoof of the animal. That, in my estimation, and the veterinarian that looked at the case, and the sheriff and the investigators, was physically impossible for someone to pull that off. So, I mean, I could give you example after example, but these are the exception. The vast majority of cases could be done by someone proficient who knew what they were doing and was trained. The vast majority of cases are done, it appears, with a sharp implement like a scalpel. I did turn in a number of cases to a hematologist who worked with Linda in Denver, Dr. John Altshuler, And in two of those cases, if I remember correctly, there was evidence of high heat. So some sort of heat implement was used, whether it was a hot knife or possibly some sort of lasing instrument. I don't know, but the wound seemed to be sealed,
like cauterized or whatever.
Cauterized, yeah. There was cooked hemoglobin along the incisional edge, but that's way the exception. Those cases are, way the exception. The vast majority of cases I saw were either people misidentifying scavenger action or the cases that appeared to have been perpetrated by someone with skill. The vast majority of them were with a sharp cutting implement, and someone with skill could have done those things.
Yeah. I remember some of the things you said in the last show that I thought was really fascinating, but someone in the chat room wanted to know if what the frequency was of these mutilations happening downwind or downstream of nuke plants or test zones. Yeah,
that was a theory that was arrived at by my mentor, David Perkins, who he and I are co-authoring the follow-up to Stalking the Herd called Mute Speak. David was the first one to notice and realize that the areas of high incidence or regions where these cases tended to cluster seem to be all downwind and downstream of where we utilize, mine, weaponize, uranium. Downwind from power plants, downstream from power plants, downwind of the Nevada test site. If you look at a map of radiation, above ground radiation from 100, nuclear tests, detonations, the areas where most of that fallout occurred tends to be where quite a number of the cases, I'd almost say a majority of cases, are clustered in the upper Midwest, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Kansas, Nebraska. These areas were in the way the Gulf, the jet stream works. A lot of that radiation was deposited there. And then if you go downwind and downstream from weapons labs, missile silo fields, places, uranium mines, that sort of thing, there are exceptions to that rule, of course. This is mostly a west or east of the Rockies scenario. As you go west of the Rockies, the mutilations dramatically fall off in number. The vast majority of them are on the front range of the Rockies, on the east side of the Rockies, and then out in the Midwest.
Does that have anything to do with the? I'm sorry. Does that have anything to do with the head count, the herd? I mean, the head of cattle population.
Well, yeah, I mean, you do have plenty of cattle on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon. Lesser so in Nevada, lesser so in Idaho. But yeah, that's where your largest concentration of cattle is, from Texas north to the Dakotas.
Wow. Now another question that came up in the forum is what is, and you talked earlier briefly about the San Luis Valley there, but what's your opinion on why certain locations on our planet seem to be hotspots for UFO activity? And do you think there is a reason for this that we have yet to consider?
Well, Dr. Louis Turry came up with a formula that I've kind of expanded upon. And we both noticed that if you have an area where you have sacred sites for indigenous people, Indian reservations, and this is I'm talking about North America primarily here, and those locations have unusual geophysical properties, whether it's the close proximity of maximum and minimum magnetic field strength in close proximity to one another, gravitic lows, for instance, aquifers, and you'll often find that those areas have indigenous legends of flying seed pods, flying shields, flying canoes. You have waves of activity and flaps of activity that tend to go on longer. They tend to be centralized, and invariably you have a U.S. military presence. And oftentimes they're trying to expand their presence. And if you have those 5 things in a particular region, chances are you're going to have all kinds of weirdness, whether it's cryptozoological sightings of wild men, Bigfoot, Momo, skunk apes, or whatever name you want to use, strange aberrant social behavior, weird weather. All these things tend to cluster around areas that I would call a window area, a doorway area, a hotspot, a portal area. So if you look at those 5 elements and they're present in a location, all you have to do is start doing some research and doing some digging in newspaper archives and look back into your primary source material. You'll uncover an incredible potpourri of weirdness. Trust me on that. I've done it.
Now, I know you look deeply into the San Luis Valley, and you talked earlier about your database and extensive work on that. Have you looked into other hotspot areas? Has this intrigued you to look into other ones? Yeah,
I have. I live now in Arizona, and I've been slowly kind of nosing around the Sedona area. In fact, last week I had a sighting with 4 ladies from Beijing. Actually, they were visiting the Sedona area with a group for a conference. I took them out on a UFO tour. I'm a tour guide I do private tours to Grand Canyon. We also offer a
Don't
UFO
you do the
tour.
donkeys and
the donkeys? No, they're mule trips. No, I drive up in a Lincoln Navigator, and it's on the South Rim, and lunch at El Tovar. It's kind of a top shelf deal. Yeah. They walk along the rim a little bit, but I've been up there over 400 times.
Wow. Yeah, I had heard something about it. And I don't know. Maybe someone was teasing.
They're cutting out the mule trips.
Are they really? Wow.
Yeah, they're only doing a couple, 3 a week now. They used to do that many a day. It costs too much money to keep the trail, the Bright Angel Trail and the K-Bab Trail, maintained because of the wear and tear from the mule trips. And they have to do the mule trips down to the Phantom Ranch because that's the only way they can get. The Phantom Ranch is right on the river, and they have to load in all the food and take out all the garbage and stuff. And so they run the reprovisioning trips frequently. And the amount of money they charge the cowboys for the concession doesn't even lick the tip of the iceberg for the amount of money it costs to keep the trail up if you have so many mule trips going down. So they're phasing them out going into the canyon. They're now urging people to take the rim trips along the rim.
Yeah, wow. So let's see. There was another question that someone wanted to know. In the view of the number of UFO sightings over bodies of water, what do you think do you think there could be possibly underwater or underground UFO bases?
Yeah, I think everybody out there should read one of the best books, UFO books ever written by Ivan T. Sanderson called Invisible Residents. And he makes the very actually surprising statement that 50% of all UFO sightings are in conjunction with bodies of water. And I find that very interesting. When you look at Shag Harbor, there's quite a number of fairly well documented sightings of USOs or unidentified submerged objects. There were objects. My dad was in the Coast Guard. John O'Brien was in the Coast Guard during the mid to late 40s in Puget Sound, and he said that when they had gotten a new radar unit on their Coast Guard cutter, that at one point there were objects seen entering and leaving the Straits of Juan de Fuca at impossible speeds back in the right around the Kenneth Arnold time. He was in the Coast Guard, I think, 46, 47, 48, 49, or 45, 46, 47, 48. So it was sometime in that time period. Of course, he told us the story a couple times when I was growing up, and then when I got into all this stuff, it's pretty full time. Back in the 90s, he totally denied that he ever told us. I wanted to get him on record. And he said, "Oh, no, you never heard that from me." And of course, the whole family had heard the story a number of times, so he just refused to fess up on it. Wow. He would always change the subject.
Yeah.
Yes, I do have a sense that we do have some sort of presence. People often ask me, do you think we're being visited by aliens from another planet? And my stock response is, how do you know we're not the aliens and they're more terrestrial than we are? We may be dealing with other tenants in the building, folks. Just because they want us to believe that they're extraterrestrials and from outside of our closed system here, it doesn't necessarily mean they are. They could have a long time, many thousands of year presence here, and they could have underground or underwater facilities. I've heard rumors over the years of our own military having underwater bases, some that go inland for miles. There's allegedly, submarine pens that come in all the way from the California coast, all the way, according to some rumors, all the way to Nevada. I have a hard time believing that, but you go off the the southeast corner or the northeast corner of Puerto Rico, just off the El Yunque mountain area in the El Yunque National Reserve there. There have been many, many reports of UFO-type craft entering and leaving the ocean there right off the continental shelf. It would be a perfect place to hide when you think about it. And I saw some crazy post a number of weeks ago, and somebody might want to chime in if you have some information about this, but according to this source, and again, we're dealing with the potential realm of fake news here, but someone claimed that Edward Snowden said that the president gets a brief every day of monitoring deep ocean trench vents where UFOs are said to come and go from the interior of the earth. Now, I haven't heard anybody else jump on board on that particular leaked email or whatever the source is from that from Snowden. And of course, I always assume that it's just somebody pulling our leg, but it wouldn't surprise me. Let's put it that way. It would not surprise me. In fact, people don't understand how sophisticated our technology is. How many out there know about Dumpster, which is a satellite system that I started hearing about in the mid-'90s that's able to map, according to this article on Milsat Magazine, which is it's the go-to website for new and interesting, unclassified news about spy satellites, military, weather, GPS, all that sort of thing. There's an article from 2008 that talks about Dumpster, which is a 10 by 10 or 100 satellites that are able to look into the Earth's core. And according to this article, it says 50,000 feet into the Earth's core. Now, I heard the number 5,000 feet, but in this article, it says the Dumpster satellites will map underground to a depth of 50,000 feet. And then it goes on to say, it's quite an interesting article. It's Dumpster, D-U-M-S-T-R. Now, I heard in 1997-98 that this was operational and that the first place that they mapped was the Giza Plateau. The second place they mapped was the Yucatan Peninsula. And the third place they mapped was the southern Rocky Mountains, right where I lived, looking for negative spaces underground or caverns, lava tubes, an ancient underground tunnel system. I interviewed a miner who helped expand the national lab at Los Alamos underground back in the late 50s, early 60s. His group, allegedly, according to him, broke into an ancient underground tunneling system that, by the appearance of the amount of mineralization and stuff in there, they estimated it was thousands and thousands of years old. It appeared to run for miles and miles. They were sworn to secrecy. The team of this particular team of miners was broken up, and they were all sent to different teams and told not to talk about it. And this comes from a very, very reputable source with a 3-generation presence at the lab. So it would not surprise me. In answer to your listener's question, no, it would not surprise me at all. In fact, I have a feeling that, just read Richard Sauter's wonderful book, Underground Bases Underground Bases and Tunnels, What is the Government Trying to Hide, by Richard Sauter. Is an exceptional book. He spent years combing through all the appropriations bills sent out of Congress and could find not one bit of funding for 129 underground facilities that we know about that are publicly acknowledged. He couldn't find how they were actually funded and built. Now, I think NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain may be an exception. I'm not sure if that was in his list of apparently unfunded underground projects, but a very interesting. The only time I ran into any potential problems with my investigative work was when I was looking into this particular subject. So I'm a little hesitant to talk about specific locations and that sort of thing. But let's leave it at this. Along the border of Colorado and New Mexico, there are a number of facilities.
Wow. You kind of answered a number of questions that this person had put in the forum, but let's see. How deeply underground do you think military bases can physically be constructed? Do you think that any have been constructed to take advantage of pre-existing naturally occurring large underground caverns so as to reduce the amount of excavation required? Could satellite technology, you've already addressed all that, but...
Yeah. Well, interesting. I went to high school in Kent, Washington, and someone turned me on to a patent application that was filed right when I was in high school, or just after I graduated from high school, for a nuclear-powered submarine, which would be a nuclear-powered tunneling device that would not leave behind any excavated material. It would melt it and then layer it in a 6-inch glass sort of coating along the interior of the tunnel. So the machine would not kick any dirt out from behind it. It would melt the dirt and actually use that as a reinforcement for the 6-inch reinforcement of molten rock material that would line the inside of the tunneling device. And according to the patent application, if I remember correctly, it could go 7 miles through bedrock a day. And I think, under sediment and looser material, it could go further. Now, if that's true, think of how many miles and miles of tunnels we could have already, excavated and created since the late 70s.
Well, I can see how something like that actually could work, but the thing, wouldn't it leave behind a trace of radiation as well, most likely?
Not necessarily. I mean, nuclear submarines don't leave behind traces of radiation. Nuclear power plants, if they're operated properly, don't leave any. All it's doing is creating heat. And if it's a controlled, chain reaction that's shielded, in theory, you could be able to do that.
No. Okay, I see. All right, and so as far as the underground, tunnels go, this was very interesting what you mentioned a few minutes ago about Los Alamos. And so was that a constructed tunnel? They actually thought it was a constructed tunnel and not a natural, cavern or something?
Well, you have to understand the lab sits right to the east of a huge supervolcano caldera. And there are lava tubes that stretch out all through that particular area of the Jemez Mountains there. And I think initially they used some of these natural spaces, naturally negative spaces underground, and then expanded them. A lot of our infrastructure is underground in these bases. And the Skunk Works and other places, aerospace R&D facilities and that sort of thing. There's probably a lot of industry, military hardware. If you go to Kirtland Air Force Base, you have the Manzano Mountains and Coyote Canyon, where you have an underground facility that's the largest repository, I think, of nuclear weapons. At least it used to be the largest storehouse of nuclear weapons. All this stuff was manufactured. All these facilities were created. And, of course, it would make sense to utilize lava tubes and naturally occurring caverns and expand on those. That makes perfect sense to me. Again, the book to read is Underground Bases and Tunnels. What's the government trying to hide? It's the seminal book on the subject. And Richard Sauter spent years researching this, and the guy's, he's got a PhD, so you got to think that he knows how to research. Mm-hmm. And he's got, all sorts of documentation in there that's pretty mind-blowing.
Right. I've just he was actually on this show at some point. I think maybe, I don't know, a year and a half ago or something like that. But let's see, there was a question up. I guess it's gone. But as far as your own research goes, you said that now you're basically doing some work in the area you're in. Is it actually the Sedona area that you're in?
I'm nearby. I'm not in Sedona, but I'm within a half hour, 40 minutes away.
Because it seems to me that I've heard that area is kind of a hot spot as well.
It is. It's not as much of a hot spot as the media has made it out to be. Back in the 80s and 90s, a fellow researcher who has lived here since I think the early 80s, Tom Dongo, he did a lot of work running around here. I met him early on in the early 90s, and we kept in touch, and it was very interesting. We had events that occurred, same exact sighting events would occur almost simultaneously in Sedona and all the way 450 miles away or so in the San Luis Valley. Uncanny. Even one weekend where both locations had a military jet crash and start a forest fire. Weird synchronicities. And Tom spent a lot of time with Linda Bradshaw out on the Bradshaw Ranch, which is probably the main ground zero UFO hotspot here in the Sedona area. And again, it has all those elements that we talked about before, that formula that I mentioned. And Linda and her husband got behind on their taxes, and the government swooped in and appropriated the ranch. So it's been placed off limits, even though it's public land. You're not allowed to go onto the ranch. Of course, don't tell anybody, but I've kind of snuck around there a little bit, and others do. I've never actually had the type of sightings that they were experiencing in the 80s and 90s there, but that is my favorite skywatching spot in the Sedona area, is on the rise that's just outside of the ranch above it that overlooks the ranch area, and that's where we had the sighting event last week.
Wow. Now, what do you think about the Native American connection and what they would call sky people and things like that? I mean, are you involved into looking into any of that?
Oh, absolutely. That's a major part of my work.
Ah, okay. So let's talk about that, because you're right. There's a lot of Native American culture in that area. Is that right?
Yeah, well, of course, the primordial indigenous people, the Aborigines of North America, the Hopi and Zuni are right here in Arizona and just over the border in New Mexico. And I've one of my dearest, closest friends is a Zuni elder, Clifford Mahudi, who I think you've had on the show.
No, I haven't had him on.
Oh, you should have Clifford on. He's an amazing guy. He was in charge of environmental assessment and civil engineering projects for the Department of Interior. He'd go around the country to Indian reservations and do the environmental assessment for large construction projects for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And he does differential equations, calculates loads, can do advanced calculus. The guy is brilliant. He's got a advanced degree in civil engineering, but he's also, steeped in his cultural traditions. And it's been, about 7 years now, 8 years that I've known him. I talked him into going public with his, the knowledge that they've held for thousands of years about the star people. Many of your listeners have heard of the word Kachina. Mm-hmm. And whenever you hear Kachina in the Pueblo Indian tradition, that basically is talking about a form of a god form that you could say are star people in a rough general way. There's different types of Kachinas, and one type well, actually, they're all supposedly from outside the Earth here. Whether they're coming from far away, whether they're coming from underground, underwater, that's open to interpretation. But according to Clifford, they are star beings. They're coming from different, stars, different points in our galaxy. And for many generations, they interacted physically with the people until they started not to return people that they were taking. They used to take them and return them. And then when they started not returning them, the natives, they said, look, we'll honor you and we'll keep your traditions alive if you stop coming here and taking our people. And so the people kind of emulate the Kachinas now, and that's these very intriguing masks and outfits that the Pueblo Indians wear when they do their ceremonies. The Kachina masks, those are replications of the star beings, what they look like, and when those dancers put on that gear, they are assuming the role of the star people that the star people used to do when they were interacting with the people. And so anytime you see a Kachina doll, look at it carefully and look at some of the adornments, and everything that's on those outfits has a very deep meaning and has special relevance to the particular type of Kachina it is. The Kachinas are responsible for various aspects of the culture, whether it's has to do with the agriculture, whether it has to do with the weather, whether it has to do with their spiritual tradition, whether it has to do with the ancestors. And it's a very complicated system, and each of the Kachinas has its own group or society that is responsible for that particular Kachina. The Pueblo people are divided up into clans that are matrilineal. The women sign all the contracts, own all the property. So you have a clan system, you have a medicine society tradition, and then you have a Kachina society tradition. And the interrelated relationships between those three are very, very complicated and very involved. And because I'm not native, I don't really like to talk about this publicly very much. That's why I've convinced Clifford to come out, because it's his traditional knowledge, not mine. So I'm just giving you a real brief Cliff Notes thumbnail kind of set of information here. Clifford goes into much greater detail, and walking in both worlds, being a scientist engineer, and also being an elder in his Zuni culture. He has a pretty amazing set of information that he's gone public with, and at some personal peril. I mean, he's divulging things that some of the Zuni don't even talk to with each other. And so, but he's come out. He's been on quite a number of TV shows now. He's done conferences, around the country, and I helped him with his PowerPoint presentations, and helped him scan things and put his PowerPoint presentations together. And if you have a chance to get him on the show, he's a great guest. He's funny. He's a trickster. Great sense of humor. And he moved from Zuni down here to the town where I live, and so I'm he's Kimosabe, I'm Tonto. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll talk off air and get his information. I'd love to.
Okay.
Love to have him on. That's fun. Yes, I've being a fine arts and antiques appraiser. I've just 2 weeks ago I appraised a Kachina doll collection, and mostly contemporary, but they do go back. I have had some catalogs from 19th century, so I'm not sure how long the tradition of actually making the dolls, for one, goes, but I think it's at least
it goes
19th
way,
century.
way back. There's three different types of Kachina dolls. There's the traditional dolls that are there's the small dolls for the kids, and then there's versions of those small size dolls that are about a foot tall, that are flat, that are the traditional style. And then you have the full three-dimensional sort of accurate replicas, which are the artistic versions, which are the valuable ones that are more of a modern incarnation of the form. And of course, the Hopi were the ones that were the first ones to really start making these dolls available. I stop at the Cameron Trading Post on every one of my Grand Canyon tours, and they have an incredible collection of dolls there, and I've been slowly adding to my collection.
Someone wanted to know about the blue star kachina. Are you familiar with what that is?
Yes, I do. And again, I'm really unwilling to talk about that. It's.
Is that a cat?
Hold on. My cat's freaking out about something. But she has a mouse. Get that thing.
I can take
the first mouse I've ever seen in my house.
I can take a quick break if you'd like to take care of that.
Well, she'll probably take care of it. Hey, take it outside here. Come on, get that thing out of here. Where is that thing?
Well, this is definitely a first on the show. To have a cat partake.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's definitely a first.
I shouldn't have opened the door because now the mouse came in and it's hiding in my office here somewhere.
Can't make this stuff up. All right.
Okay, I'm sorry. Where were we?
You said you were unwilling to talk about the blue star kachina.
Blue star kachina.
Yeah. And I can talk to Clifford about that.
Pardon me?
I can talk to Clifford about that if he's willing to talk about it when he's on the show.
Well, let me just answer it this way.
Yeah.
That is one of the most misunderstood and misrepresented bit of Hopi information that has come out of Sedona, and there are so many people trying to palm off their own versions of that particular prophecy story. There's different versions of it, but I just refuse to go there because there's so much disinformation out there about it. It's actually been a really big problem up at the Hopi Reservation with people going up there, hearing a version of it, and then putting their own spin on it. It's the Crystal Pack and Mamas here in Sedona have really been doing a number on the Hopi with this, and claiming all these things that aren't part of the actual indigenous information. And so that's the one area that I really do not want to get into because there's so much misinformation about it.
Sure, no problem at all. Yeah.
Yes, we'll address that.
Travis Walton has been coming up all night on the message board. Do you speak with him?
Yeah, of course. He the event in November 75 just happened right along the rim, about 60 miles east of me.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that was that. What was it? Not snow. What's it called?
Well, he lived in Snowflake, but it was south of Heber, right on the Mogollon Rim.
Right. Heber, that's right. Yeah, and so I really
Turtle Creek, if you really want to know the exact location.
Yeah,
or Turkey Creek. Sorry.
That's one of these stories that I think I've spoke to Travis many times, and to me, I think it's one of the most solid stories out there. And someone wanted to know what your opinion was on that, on his whole story.
Yeah. I've known Travis now for a number of years, and I spent an afternoon with him and Tracy Torme, who was the producer of the Fire in the Sky movie, and spent several hours with him, good quality time. When he goes into that 1,000-yard stare, it's pretty compelling. I've caught him kind of going off into that on a number of occasions, and I really think the guy had that experience. I think it may not have been what people have spun it into being about aliens from other planets. He was never really told. Rarely do you hear about the humanoid, the humans that he saw, apparent human types that were he saw. People, take the middle part of the movie that Hollywood's total fabrication of what happened while he was on the ship. Only 2 of those shots of that entire sequence actually happened. He didn't wake up in a slimy cocoon.
Right.
They didn't poke a needle in his eye. All that stuff was just sensationalized Hollywood fear-mongering, basically. He and Tracy were livid about that. In fact, there was talk of getting their names taken off the movie. They were in legal action at one point. But, it was already a fait accompli, so they had to live with it, unfortunately. I really do feel that the event was real. Clifford Mahooty, just up the road at the Zuni Reservation, up the road from St. John's, the town of St. John's, had an amazing sighting in that 2-week period where Travis had his experience. That was right over his house. His whole family saw it. His father refused to talk about it for 35, almost 40 years. And when Clifford brought me over to meet his father finally, he kind of mentioned, my dad saw it too, but he's never talked about it. His father, who was in his early 90s, sat me down and told me. And Clifford was flabbergasted. He'd never been able to get him to talk about it. And he slowly told me what he experienced. They had night vision binoculars. They were able to, the craft was just a few hundred feet above their part of the pueblo where they live. They saw beings, something walking in front of lit windows, silhouettes. And 2 weeks later, his father died.
Wow.
So, and the only real major wave of cattle mutilations that we know of happened during the month prior to Travis's case, right in the same area. So, draw your own conclusions.
Wow. Now, I didn't realize I know night vision's been around for a long, long time, but I didn't realize that it was really available in the, what was that, in the 75?
His brother was a lookout in the Navy and absconded with a pair, first gen.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, so let's see. I had another question I wanted to get to because I thought it was pretty interesting, and it's just one that I would never think of, and that was another one in the forum. And this is a little bit of a long one. So if an extraterrestrial spacefaring race had long ago developed efficient technologies to tunnel and set up underground bases, wouldn't this be an efficient one-size-fits-all method for exploration and colonization of planetary bodies without having to limit their exploration to planets with non-hostile surface conditions?
Yeah, and I'm looking at the question, and might our own human space exploration programs benefit from a similar approach, one that could be tested and perfected on our own planet before using it on other planets or the moon or whatever? And how do we know that we haven't already done that? There's a whole body of belief out there, the breakaway civilization, in the words of Richard Dolan, secret space program and all that. I've never seen evidence to support any of that, but I mean, we are missing $6.6 trillion from the Department of Defense, so
yeah,
that buys you a lot of tech, And I had a guy named Wayne Holland that I interviewed back in the 90s who claimed that we were, already on Mars, that we'd been on the moon for quite some time. Apollo was just a lot of after-the-fact sort of public relations, that we had actually done all this before that in the early 60s. I have a hard time believing this stuff, but when he sat down on the couch in my house, my girlfriend had a cat that hated men. The workers who built her house had abused the kitty, thrown it up in the air, and just terrorized this poor little thing. Whenever a male would come around, she'd immediately hide. In 7 years, I never petted the cat once. And when this guy came in and sat down on the couch, Miss Kitty ran into the room and leapt up in his lap and started purring and allowed him to pet her. So that impressed me more than his story. So, who knows? In answer to the question, yeah, of course it would be the smart way to approach it. You're going to be shielding yourself from, cosmic rays, radiation. The deeper you go on the planet, the warmer you get. Like on Earth, if you go down to the bottom of the Kimberley diamond mines, I mean, it's 100 and something degrees down there. Those poor guys are sweating their tails off. The lower you go, the hotter it gets. And, how deep can we go? We don't really know the answer to that. In terms of, classified facilities, I've heard depths of over a mile. So, wow. That's what's been bannered about. Again, these are rumors. I have no way of substantiating this. But again, I do remind everybody, Richard Sauter, he's the guy who wrote the book. So I would urge everybody to do your research, and choose your sources carefully and do your research. People forget that humans are very ingenious. And a lot of the stuff that we see flying around could be black projects that have been operational for a number of years that are being flown around as plausible deniability for our military. And it would not surprise me in the least that a sizable percentage of what people think are UFOs are actually, are missing tax dollars at work and play. Right. What's a government's job? A government's job is to control the populace. Okay. The best way to control the populace is always keep them guessing, but always be, in a position to always have the answer. Well, the very fact that the government doesn't have an answer to the UFO question should give one pause. That to me is interesting. And all this talk about disclosure and, Obama's going to disclose before the end of his term and all this. Every time I see that post up there, I on Facebook or wherever, I challenge everybody and say, I have $100 in PayPal. I'll bet anybody $100 that will not happen. And I haven't had any takers. I've got $100. I'll bet anybody $100 that not only will Obama not disclose, but I don't think we'll have any sort of official disclosure ever. Obviously, the beings, whomever they are in charge of the disclosure process. When there's disclosure, it'll be their time to pick and choose. I think all these other countries opening up their files and doing this kind of sort of half-assed disclosure is just being done to take the heat off the U.S., And I don't think for a minute that our government is the repository of advanced knowledge about these craft and possible entities. I think a lot of this has been sequestered into the military-industrial complex in terms of the aerospace companies, where it's out of reach of Freedom of Information Act requests. Right. Yeah. I think that our elected officials don't have a need to know for the most part. I don't think even the presidents are in a position to know the full extent of our knowledge. I have a real hard time believing that we have back-engineered alien technology. It would be like giving a cell phone to a Neanderthal for all we know. Mm-hmm. I mean, read Jacques Vallée's novel Fast Walkers, which he co-wrote with Tracy Torme, by the way. That's a really good example of probably what's going on. He had to fictionalize things in there because he was forced to. But, and I saw a question on there about element 115. They've already discovered element 115 way after Lazar, and it has nowhere near the properties that Lazar talked about. I think there's a lot of disinformation. Small amount too,
or something like that, right?
Yeah, it only exists for a nanosecond.
Right,
and,
that's it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
People have to understand that the UFO community is totally been compromised and infiltrated with disinformation. This whole thing with Tom DeLonge, to me, it's just a dog and pony show. I won't believe any of this until something real concrete is presented. I think he's a grandstander. I think he's a little bit more believable than someone like a Stephen Greer or David Wilcock or Corey Good, or these every 6 months there's some new bozo coming out with all these claims with no documentation, with no evidence, no DD-214 document, for instance. And I think that's part of the disinformation program, is to every 6 months, every year or so, come out with a Pete Peterson, a Dan Burrish, Doty, pulling the wool over Linda's eyes at Kirtland. I mean, the example after example after example, down, one after another. The MJ-12 documents, the supposed Holloman footage that Robert Emmernager and Jamie Shandero were promised by the Air Force, the Holloman landing footage, blah, 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 blah. It's just happened too many times.
Yeah. Well, you've been at this a long
research,
time,
folks. You'll understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, the one thing about Tom DeLonge that I think is good, at least he's, and this could all be disinformation. There is, a lot of people are saying this is what is happening, but he seems to be at least opening some doors and getting some people involved. And I guess, one thing during the news, Alejandro said, that I agree with is we will know something one way or the other, in a fairly short amount of time. In other words, if things don't come to fruition, then, he's going to have to talk about it.
Yeah, but why Tom DeLonge? I mean, what's the motivation of getting some, punk rocker to hang up his guitar, quit his band? I mean, what's the motivation? The guy's got plenty of dough.
Yeah, his own motivation to do that.
It's a big ego thing. To me, it's grandstanding.
Yeah, but if he actually can do these things where other people can't, then perhaps
more power to him.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a wait and see.
I doff my hat and genuflect at the and I'll blink 182 times.
But I know you've seen this. You've seen this a lot, and I should say we only have about 8 minutes, and there was someone that may have wanted to call in, and I forgot all about that. So if you still want to call in, you're listening, dial 603-967-4030. Again, we only got about 5 minutes, but you're welcome to call in if you'd like to. So what's next? Are you doing? I think on your last show you mentioned that you may have a follow-up to your last book, which was, by the way, 600 pages, right?
I'm working on one.
You are? Okay.
Yeah, with David Perkins, who's the grandfather of mutology, if you will. He's the one that trained Linda Howe back in the 70s. He's the first person she went to. He's one of my dearest, closest friends, has written the foreword to all my books, and is the most knowledgeable person in this field, and is an incredibly brilliant guy. He's got a master's in political science from Yale. Just brilliant, off the charts thinker, very creative thinker. Is really into Earth system science, formerly known as Gaia theory. We've been working on some pretty interesting, exotic angles, looking at a lot of this information, kind of looking at it from a collective unconscious sort of manifestation by the collective, to draw us off planet, some sort of evolutionary imperative. We're looking at some pretty exotic theories. We're also looking at a lot of data, and the book Mute Speak will be the analysis of stalking the herd. I don't go into a lot of analysis in stalking the herd because I didn't have enough room. It's 600 pages, and it's going to be another 400 or 500 page book if we're lucky. It'll be that small, just to analyze all that data.
Now, what about where you're at now? For instance, if there was a cattle that was mutilated, say, in your area, does anyone know that you have relocated, or would you be contacted, or do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I was contacted about a case last year, and the rancher ducked me and didn't really want to deal with me.
Yeah.
Which is 1 out of 10 is our estimate of how many cases actually get reported. And this particular case was the rancher coming out and fessing up, but then ducking myself and another investigator. When we went up there, I actually went up to the ranch. It happened 40 miles from here. So the first cases that I've heard of in Arizona, one of the reasons why I moved to Arizona is because they don't have cases. My least favorite thing in the world is to go out and investigate a dead, rotting pile of cow flesh. Believe me, it's not fun.
Yeah. Well, I bet it's not, but it must be when you get into the cases like the one you talked about earlier with the brain cavity was, dry and empty and all that. I mean, when something is that bizarre, I mean, it must really be fascinating in a way, even though.
Well,
gruesome.
Yeah, it's like rubbernecking at a really nasty highway accident, sure.
Yeah. And but how about where you used to live? How are people still trying to get in touch with you about ongoing things up there?
Yeah, they are. Or Chuck Sikowski is getting some of the more questionable cases. Chuck's in the the Front Range, Colorado Springs, Denver area, and he's been making some hay off cases that happened years ago. He's still talking about them to the media and stuff. I normally don't approach the media when I get a case. I try to keep it quiet until my investigation is completed, and I have the permission by the rancher. When ranchers come out and really want a lot of publicity and stuff, and that to me is a kind of bells go off in my book when that happens. Especially when you don't background check the ranchers and you find out about insurance scams and you ask around the ranching community, well, what do you think of this guy? And then you start comparing people's opinions about people. Chuck doesn't do that. Unfortunately, I investigate the rancher as well as the cow. Believe me.
Yeah. When something like that happens, I have no idea how these things work. But when something like that happens and it's a real mysterious situation, are they still covered for insurance?
No, very few of these ranchers carry insurance for their animals. It's just, I mean, some do, but something like this, unless they can prove that the animal was targeted, it's just written up as just a mundane natural loss. 2% of all cows die every year. 2% of the herd dies.
Wow.
Every year. So there's a lot of dead cows out there, and these guys generally know what they're looking at. But I've had, I don't know how many ranchers have said, "Yep, they drained my damn Bessie. It's drained the blood," and all I have to do is get somebody to help me, and I turn the thing over, and whoosh.
Yeah, because it all settles to the gravity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, interesting. Never thought of that. Wow.
Yeah.
We're just at the end of the show now, and do you want to go ahead and give out your website and also are you on every show of the Paracast?
Yeah. Well, lately I've been kind of missing a few, but yeah, generally I am the official co-host for the Paracast. It's theparacast.com, theparacast.com. We have a very active forum community there. We have a 500-plus show archive. Wow. We ask tough questions, and we really do try to. Extraordinary claims require some evidence, for the most part. I know that I've kind of mentioned a few that are just purely anecdotal, but I think my work speaks for itself. I do have a website that hasn't been updated in a while. I've been so busy, OurStrangePlanet.com. And if you want to peruse through my database, just do a Google search, SLV, S as in Sam, L as in Larry, V as in Victor, event log, SLV event log. And what'll come up is, I can give you the address right now. My database has been public for 15 years.
Wow.
I don't hold back data. Anybody who wants my data is welcome to it.
Well, I have to tell you, Chris, we're out of time, so I'm going to have to say goodnight. All right.
No problem.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening live, and we'll be back next week. Our guest just told me tonight, and he was from the X-Files, that he can't be on next week. So I am going to get someone else for our guest next week, and that will be posted on our website on Sunday, and you'll be able to see that in a forum. I want to thank everyone for listening, and I want to thank everyone that helped out on the show, and I got to go, and keep your eyes to the sky.